Today we're going to be going over another fulfillment prophecy that the church claims proves that Jesus is the Messiah. It is the genealogy that connects Jesus to King David, which we see in the book of Matthew in the first chapter. Now, the reason the church put this genealogy in here is because in the Hebrew scriptures, that's one of the criteria for the Messiah. He must come from the line of David. So first, let's go to the Hebrew scriptures and find those proof verses that actually make that claim, so we know that this is what God says the Messiah has to be. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to the book of 2 Samuel. We're going to go to chapter 7 and look at verse 12. What it says there is, when your days are complete, this is God speaking to David, by the way. When your days are complete, and you lie with your forefathers, I shall rise up for you your offspring, who will issue from your loins, and I shall make his kingdom firm. Verse 13. He shall build a temple for my sake, and I shall make firm the throne of his kingdom forever. So, not only does the Messiah have to come from David, but he has to come from David's son Solomon. And why we say Solomon is because God specifically says here that his offspring that he's going to give the kingdom to forever is the one that builds the temple for God. So Solomon is the one that built the first temple. So this is where we get one of the proofs that the Messiah has to come from David and also from Solomon. Now we're going to go to the second proof. The second proof is going to be in the book of Isaiah. So we're going to turn to Isaiah chapter 11 and verse 1. Now this is talking about the Messiah himself, and it says, a staff will grow from the stump of Jesse. Jesse is, of course, David's father, so it's actually going back another generation. And a shoot will sprout from his roots. So this is explicitly saying that the Messiah has to be an actual descendant. Like, he has to actually come from that bloodline. It can't be somebody that's outside of the bloodline and got connected to the family some other way. It has to be directly from the bloodline, because it's bringing up Jesse because Jesse is passed away at this point. And so just like a tree that has been felled and there's just a stump left at the ground, a lot of times its stump will actually bring forth sprouts of saplings trying to rejuvenate itself and cause another tree to come up. And that's exactly what it's talking about. The Messiah is going to be something that's directly connected to Jesse and David and Solomon. So it's directly connected. So there's two more verses, and those are both going to be in the book of Jeremiah. So we're going to turn to Jeremiah chapter 23, and we're going to go to verse 5. So what it says there, behold, days are coming, the word of God, when I will establish a righteous sprout from David. A king will reign and prosper, and he will administer justice and righteousness in the land. So here, it's doing the same metaphor of a sprout coming forth from David this time instead of Jesse. So it's just bringing the line a little bit closer to Solomon. But we already have the Solomon verse anyway. So this is showing directly that the metaphors of the sprout are just showing you they have to be actually bloodline. So the last verse we're going to look at is in Jeremiah. It's going to be chapter 33 and verse 15. Again, it's going to be the same along the same lines. It's going to say, in those days, at that time, I will cause a sprout of righteousness to sprout forth from David. It's the same metaphor. It means the same thing. And he will administer justice and righteousness in the land. So we see that we have several verses that show that the Messiah has to come from David. But on top of that, he also has to come from Solomon. So, now, this is why the church in the book of Matthew, the very first chapter, right out of the box, it comes out and it tries to give the genealogy of Jesus. Because they know that that's the number one prophecy that he has to fulfill. He has to show he is from the line of David. So we're going to look at that line right now and see exactly what it says. Okay, first we're going to go to the end of the genealogy, all the way down to Joseph and Jesus. If you notice throughout the genealogy, it always says father, and then it says begot, and then the son. So at the very end, if you go to Matthew chapter 1, verse 16, it says, and Jacob begot Joseph. So Joseph, of course, is supposedly Jesus' father, and Jacob is Joseph's father. So it says Jacob begot Joseph. But then it goes on and says, the husband of Mary, to whom was born Jesus. So see, it's not saying that Jesus is connected to Joseph. It's saying Joseph is connected to Mary, which gave birth to Jesus. So you see here, it's specifically telling you that he is not part of Joseph's line. So the entire genealogy they just gave you is irrelevant. It's talking about Joseph's genealogy, not Jesus' genealogy. Now they had to put it in there like this because the church claimed a virgin birth, which that's another prophecy that we're going to go on to in another video. It's too much to put in one video to do all these at once, so we're just going to talk about this genealogy. But they put it like, they worded it like this because they had to disconnect Joseph from and Jesus, because they're trying to claim that Jesus was a virgin birth, so he didn't have a father. Well, the very fact that he didn't have a father shows he's not from the line of David, which shows that he cannot be the Messiah. There's absolutely no way he can become the Messiah just for that fact. But now we're going to go over a couple more things just to kind of like put a nail in the coffin. If you go up a little bit, you're going to see in Matthew chapter 1, verse 11, so just a few verses prior, when it's going through the middle of the genealogy, it talks about a king named Jeconiah. So Jeconiah is in the line of Jesus's, or Joseph's, I should say, Joseph's succession. So Jeconiah happened to be a very specific king. Jeconiah was the only king in the line of David that was actually cursed by God. Now, where do we see this? We see this in the book of Jeremiah again. So, if you go into Jeremiah and you go to chapter 22, and it'll be verse 30. So, this is God. He says, inscribe this man, Jeconiah, it doesn't say Jeconiah, but he's talking about Jeconiah, inscribe this man to become childless, a man who will never seed in his life, for none of his descendants will ever succeed in being a man who sits on the throne of David, and ever to rule over Judah. So the line that they're giving you, the genealogy line that they're giving you in the book of Matthew, has this particular cursed king, which God says his descendants cannot be in the line that'll sit on a throne anymore. That line gets cut out. It has to go off of another line from just above him, which is Josiah's line. So you see that line, Jeconiah's line, is cut off. So Joseph actually comes from that line. So Joseph himself, even though he's a direct descendant from David, can't be a king on the throne, and he can't be the Messiah. So of course Jesus, which isn't even connected to Joseph, can't be. So that's the second problem that we have with that genealogy. So now we're going to go to a third problem. Okay, so now the church claims that in Matthew chapter 1 verse 17 that there's actually like a hidden mystery clue here that proves that Jesus is the Messiah, because there are 3 sets of 14 generations between Abraham and Jesus. So you have 14 generations between Abraham and David, And then you have another 14 between David and when the children of Israel carried off into Babylon, which is Jeconiah, because Jeconiah was the king when they got carried off. And then it says there's another 14 generations from when they got carried off, which is Jeconiah, until Jesus. So the significance of the 14 is the church is trying to do a play on the number 14, because in Hebrew letters have a numerical value. It's called gematria. So the name of David has a gematria of 14. So that's why they're trying to do this 3 sets of 14 to try to connect Jesus again to David and show that, look, it's such a miracle, it's 3 sets of 14. That's why he's the Messiah. So let's look closely at these sets. So the first set is from Abraham to David. That one's actually correct, and there are 14 generations. However, when you look closely at the second set of 14, when you're looking at it in Matthew, you'll see they actually have 14 genealogies listed. But when you check that list with the actual list that's in the Hebrew scriptures, that list is missing 4 kings. So there's 4 generations missing out of that center set of 14. So where do we see this in the Hebrew scriptures? We see it in the book of 1 Chronicles, chapter 3, verse 10 through 12. So what it says there is, Solomon's son was Rehoboam. Abijah was his son. Asa was his son. Jehoshaphat was his son. Joram was his son. Ahaziah was his son. Now Ahaziah is missing from Matthew. Then it says Joash was his son. Now Joash is missing from Matthew. And then it goes on to say Amaziah was his son. So Amaziah also is missing. So these 3 kings, Ahaziah, Joash, and Amaziah, those 3 are missing. And then if you go down to where it says the sons of Josiah, when you go to that verse, you'll see the sons of Josiah, the firstborn Johanan, the second Joachim. Joachim is also missing. Joachim was the person that took over after Josiah. So you'll see that Joachim's missing. Now, how do we know that the next one on the list is Jeconiah? How do we know that Jeconiah wasn't Josiah's son? Because you just go on, it says the second son was Joachim, the third was Zedekiah, the fourth was Shallum, and then it says the sons of Joachim was Jeconiah, and his son was Zedekiah. So you see that Jeconiah was the son of Joachim, but they took out Joachim also. So those are the 4 generations that are missing out of Matthew's second line of 14, which would make that line 18 instead of 14. So they intentionally manipulated the text in order to make you think that there's actually 3 sets of 14. So this is just a second set. Okay, so now let's look at the third and final set of 14. So if you just go a little further in the 1 Chronicles, chapter 3, you'll go to where it says Zerubbabel, the king Zerubbabel. So Matthew has Zerubbabel. Now match all the names in Matthew from Zerubbabel down to Joseph, and match them with the ones in 1 Chronicles chapter 3, and you'll see that everything after Zerubbabel is completely different. They're nowhere in the Hebrew scriptures. These names, they completely made up. They're not anywhere in the scriptures. They just made up names out of thin air. So the third and final genealogy, it doesn't even have the right names in it. They just completely made that all up. But also, it doesn't have 14. It only has 13. All they had to do was add another. They were making up names. All they had to do is make up one more name, and then they could have had 14. But they forgot to add one more name, so now it's 13 instead of 14. So Jesus is actually the 13th generation after Jeconiah. So what do we have here? If this would be true, if this was a prophecy of some sort and would prove a Messiah, then it wouldn't be Jesus that's the that is the Messiah. It would be his brother James, his brother or son. So if James, Jesus' brother, had a son, he would be the Messiah. Now, why do I say James? Why don't I just say if Jesus had a son, he'd be the Messiah? Well, because we've already confirmed that Jesus is not connected to Joseph. So James actually is connected to Joseph. So if Joseph's line wasn't corrupted with Jeconia, and it wasn't messed up with all those fake kings after Zerubbabel, then James would have actually been in the line of the Messiah. So if James had a son, his son would have been the 14th generation if everything panned out the way they wrote it. So here you see just a couple of issues with this genealogy, which shows you that it's completely made up. It has nothing to do with the Messiah, because you can prove just from their book alone that Jesus can't be the Messiah just on the fact that he doesn't connect to David. Okay, so I'm going to do another video on the two different genealogies that are in the Christian Bible, because this genealogy in Matthew is just one of two. There's a second genealogy in Luke, and Luke and Matthew, they don't coincide with each other. They're completely different genealogies. So we're going to go over that in the next video. And then I'll do a third video that'll talk about the virgin birth claim, and we'll go over all of those issues and show you what's going on with that. So these three videos will go together because it's all part of this genealogy thing. So with that being said, I'm going to leave you here, and we'll see you at the next video.